Welcome to the latest installment of SIGcast for AP European History at Keystone Oaks High School. This presentation is titled The Price Revolution and Commercialization. So, to tie this in with some of the things that we've been going over, the emergence of more powerful nation states that was occurring, the whole centralization, new monarchies that we learned about, wealth was increasingly taxed for state purposes. You think about the state purposes. We have the military revolution. We have states increasing their bureaucracies to manage finances, to increase their income so they can afford a large standing army, gunpowder, things to that nature. And the age of exploration that we just learned about emerges, and competing nations are seeking to create new empires overseas. And this is really an economic revolution of sorts, if you will. But first, a word from our sponsors. If you haven't done so, you need to check out Signature Gardens in Export, PA. Signature Gardens has all of your landscape needs and more. Check us out at signaturegardens.com. First, for the topic of price revolution. Prices during the 16th century, the 1500s, rose gradually. The rising population of Europe increased demand for goods, thereby increasing prices. The influx of gold and silver from the New World was one of the factors, but not the only major factor. The massive flow of Spanish silver from the likes of the Potosi mines, the American goods into Europe, which we'll get into with the Columbian Exchange, provided Europeans with plenty of cash from silver trade. This influx of silver drives prices of goods up very, very quickly, including the demand for prices of food, which were in short supply due to inefficient farming, the inefficient farming methods of like during the manorial system or the feudal times. But don't worry, Europe is about to go through an agricultural revolution. But this gradual rise in prices is known as inflation. Inflation stimulated production as producers could get more money for their goods. This also leads to the mother country's necessity of having colonies for raw materials for producing finished goods. The middle class acquires much of its wealth from trading and manufacturing during this time, and its social and political status, as we've been discussing in class, is increasing. Peasant farmers benefiting from this gradual rise in prices because when they are able to farm in the open field system, they have surplus, and their surplus yields could be turned into cash crops, thus increasing their net worth. But the nobility, their fixed income, or their income was fixed, and it's based off of old feudal rents and fees. They are suffering a diminishing standard of living in the inflationary economy. In other words, they're not making anything. Prices are going up. Their income, it's like a retired person today. When inflation goes up and you're retired and you have a fixed income, you're in the outside looking in. You need to find a way. You're either hoping for deflation, so your money goes further, or you might need to get a job after you retire in some kind of other field. Anyway, that's my little analogy for you. So, in turn, what they decide to do is they're going to close off their lands to the peasants. Remember, in the open field system, in many cases, peasants were free to grow and farm, or if they were shepherds or they had a flock of sheep, they could use and essentially share the land. But they started to get closed off the land. They closed the land to the peasants to harvest more efficiently. This is known as the enclosure movement. We'll get into that a little bit more directly here soon. As a result, landowners will become substantially more rich, especially those who fence off these lands and organize themselves better. So in essence, what we have here is a change in the open field system, an end to the open field system. So again, the enclosure movement during the Middle Ages, European economies were dominated by landowners, large landowners, who used peasant labor to grow and harvest crops. Known as peasant agriculture, these peasants were bound to the land of their lord, paying him taxes in grain or fees, while being protected by the lord from hardship or from invasions. Again, this is describing the manner, this is describing the feudal system. The land they lived on was largely unorganized and called common land. And anyone could use for farming, foraging, or hunting. However, beginning in England in the 16th century, due to the price revolution that we just discussed, lords began to close off their lands from the peasants to farm for large profits. Fences were built, and the peasants who remained were used in a more organized manner to plant and harvest crops. Again, big picture, you got to know that this is a change, an economic revolution, if you will, meaning the old manor system that had existed during the Middle Ages and feudal time was giving way to a more modern and commercial one. Speaking of commercialization, the enclosure movement is the beginning of this commercialization, or this new age economy in Europe, the harvesting and selling of crops by large landowners for profit. And by the 16th century, some of the new economic ideas, such as printed money from banks, loans, and credit, had made their way into Europe through Italy. No longer did simply having land mean you had power. To increase your power, you had to sell goods, and that meant commercializing in agriculture. The peasants didn't go quietly. Many openly rebelled against these new laws and these new enclosures because they felt that they were being stripped of their peasants' rights. If you remember, even a little synthesis here, the peasants' revolt in Germany in 1524 and 1525, although we kind of associated that with Martin Luther and the peasants rebelling in his model, but the bottom line is they were being prevented from being able to hunt, and they were also being kind of closed off in their from their open lands, and that's one of the causes of that rebellion. So we're seeing this happen not only in England, but it also happened in Germany to an extent. Kett's Rebellion is probably the most famous example in England in 1549. So I'm going to leave a link for you to watch a video on Kett's Rebellion, and here ends this aspect of the price revolution and commercialization. We'll pick up with the rest of it tomorrow in class. Thanks for tuning in.